Shalom Aleichem, Beruchim Habayim, welcome everybody to our ongoing classes. The series which we call How to Live a Godly Life, Mystical Legends and Tales from the Talmud. I am, of course, your host, Ariel Tzadok, and you find me online at KosherTorah.com. Well, this night, just to time date us, we are now on the 10th of October 2012. Countdown to the end of the world coming up in a few couple months. So it's all been nice knowing you, but needless to say, it's all a joke. But we are right now at the end of the holiday cycle for the Hebrew month of Tishrei. And our traditions are at this time to conclude the annual reading cycle of the Torah. And as we conclude it, we begin it. So this coming Sabbath, we will begin reading the Torah from the book of Genesis. And Genesis as a section of the Torah always frustrates me, because in those 6 chapters, I can literally create a lifetime of work. There's just so much there that I'm overwhelmed. I've taught about it for hours. You find those audio lessons online. I've written about it. You find those lessons again on Kosher Torah. Later this week, for those of you listening live, you'll know I'll send out a email with a link to my Genesis classes. Not my classes, my PDFs, so you can download and read them again. Things that I've written over many, many years. But many of the teachings have their origins in the section of the Talmud that we are going to learn now. What we're going to learn now is a very it's an awesome section. It is one of the sections that so bluntly speaks about what we call the secrets of the Torah, the mysteries of the Torah, the original and authentic mystical traditions, later to be called the Kabbalah. Now, in later Judaism, and I'm talking about from the time of the Spanish and others, there grew up what we call the philosophical or the theoretical schools of mysticism. These are the schools of the of the Zohar, and later the Ari and the like. Well, needless to say, 1,000 years before they ever came into Judaism, there was the original teachings. They were divided into 3 different schools, and the learnings of these materials were clearly, delegated under Jewish law. They were outlined by Jewish law, halakha. And this section, which we are going to begin our studies tonight, are going to outline just that. We're going to learn about the 3 temple time schools of the original secrets of the Torah, and we're going to dabble into them. And I'm going to, needless to say, share with you many ideas and teachings which are hinted to in the text, because a point that I've always made for students of mysticism: secrets of the Torah are a part of the Torah. There have always been mysteries and secrets in the Torah. It is the true and authentic mysticism of the Bible. It is the true and authentic Kabbalah of the Torah tradition. You don't have to go into later philosophical works to find it. You find it in the most mystical text of them all, and that is the Talmud. Now remember, Talmud's the work of man. No one's ever said it's the divine authority of God or anything of the kind. That's why in the Talmud you'll find so many things. Because the sages who compiled this compendium, this encyclopedia, wanted to make sure that all of the things were concealed within. And tonight, well, actually through this course, this is actually, I believe, our 24th lesson in this series. And I've revealed to you many things in many of the other places. But here is where we're going to learn the laws, and we're going to see things, best word I could describe it is, raw. I'm reading, of course, from the Legends of the Talmud, the Ein Yaakov, from the Avraham Yaakov Finkel edition. In this English edition, it is page 341. It begins under the title called Subjects That May Not Be Expounded. But we're going to expound somewhat. It quotes the Mishnah. It's one of the few times that the Legends actually quotes the law itself, which is the Mishnah. And the Mishnah from page 11b states, "This now is the law." The Mishnah says, "The subject of forbidden sexual relations, in Hebrew called Arayot, may not be taught in the company of three people," meaning a teacher addressing two students. "Not the subject of creation," meaning the mysteries of the universe, "in the presence of two, nor the account of the divine chariot," Ezekiel 1, "in the presence of one, unless he is a sage who can understand it by himself. Whoever seriously inquires into four things would be better off if he had not come into this world, namely, what is above the universe, what is underneath it, what happened before creation, and what will happen after creation. And whoever has no consideration for the honor of his Maker would be better off if he had not come into the world." That is the law. Now, before we discuss the Gemara, which is the discussions, let's review quickly what the law actually is. We have three subjects here which are regulated in their dissemination. And they are the subject of forbidden sexual relations, the subject of creation, and the subject of the divine chariot. Now, needless to say, this is not just dealing with a specific chapter in the book of Leviticus, which discusses forbidden sexual relations, or Genesis chapter 1, or Ezekiel chapter 1. We are not talking about three chapters in the Bible. What we are talking about is the secrets that underlie the teachings in each of those three places, and that these names therefore become, if you will, independent schools of learning. What should we call it? Metaphysics? Spirituality? Mysteries, secrets, whatever. Let's explain. Forbidden sexual relations in Hebrew are called arayot. They are forbidden mixtures. Things that don't go together. This is a very important teaching, if you will, of the nature and the balance of what we can call good and evil. There are, in the universe, things which do not belong together. Incest is the symbolic example of those things which just don't belong together. Now, we all know the physiology of human beings. We all know that men and women biologically can copulate with one another and procreate. I mean, that's just biology. And the physiology and biology, for the most part, knows no social bounds. It could be that any man and any woman, however related, can copulate and reproduce. But the Torah has revealed to us that social relationships have therefore put a specific criteria of prohibitions upon our freedom of partner choice. Now, what are considered incest and forbidden relations? You can go into the book of Leviticus, you can look it all up. The famous ones, of course, we know. But what is it all about? Bottom line, what we're dealing with here is energies. Everything in the universe is energy. And therefore, physiologically, biologically, everything at that level is pretty much the same. But once specific energies of a kind enter into a specific form, then that form and opposite energies which enter into another form, the forms, even though in and of themselves, which might then be compatible, become incompatible because of the nature of the energies within them. Think about chemical explosions. You have certain chemical mixture A, in and of itself it's fine. And then you have certain chemical mixture B, in and of itself is fine. What happens when you put the two together? Boom! They don't mix. That's how all explosives works. Anybody who knows anything about demolitions knows that about explosives. That's just the way they are. Well, so it is with, if you will, the psychic and the spiritual realm. There are certain things that belong together and certain things that don't. Call it, if you will, good and evil. Call it, if you will, the domains of the holy and the profane. Call it, if you will, the domains of magic. Call it, if you will, the domains of the occult. These types of teachings of the proper balances of what is good and what is evil energetically can be rather dangerous if publicly disseminated. Because ultimately, in all due respect, human beings are subject to temptation. And if and when it could be revealed to certain people how they could manipulate forces of good and evil, they might be subject to be seduced by the dark side, and therefore use certain forces in contradiction to the nature of what the energy flow dictates, and therefore create a forbidden union. This is the secret of what's called the forbidden sexual unions. This is the underlying powers of black magic and the occult, which use these inappropriate unions. This is why this type of activity is called foreign or strange service. In Hebrew, avodah zarah, otherwise known as idolatry. The reason why these things are bad isn't because God doesn't like you bowing down to this statue or doing this to a rock, but rather because it's an imbalance of energies which creates, if you will, a psychic spiritual explosion, creating harmful things. This material can only be taught, at most, to a teacher and 2 trusted students. Why 2? Why not 3? Why 2? Why not 1? Well, 3 can be too many. 2 can be trusted, because one learns with another. They create a balance with one another, like a yin and a yang, if you will. Allow me to use such a un-Jewish example, but it works. They create a balance and a harmony. In the Jewish concept, we call this a chavruta, a study partner. Being that this type of material, this type of experience is external to one, therefore it is not an internal experience, and it can be learned through practice, and therefore can be taught. But the maximum number it should be taught to, because of the danger of its material, should only be 2. Because one can look after another and protect one another from harm. Once you have 3, it gets a little too expanded, and it's harder to maintain control. Now, in the days of the temple, it was an obligation of every member of the high court, the Sanhedrin, to have this knowledge, to know the ins and outs of all the occult and black magic. So to recognize it, identify it, and to bring it to appropriate justice. There's a very famous story in the Gemara about the famous Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach, who uncovered a witch's coven and had to try them for crimes. What were they doing? These witches were not running around naked around the tree, Wicca style today, they were actively involved in what we call psychic assassinations, the likes of which we see that were active in the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah complained that in his day in Jerusalem, they had psychic assassins who knew and understood the ways and means of the occult and could use it to literally suck people's soul out of them, what we today call psychic vampirism. It was a danger then. It's a danger now. How to defend against this so that people don't abuse it? Closely guarded secrets, only taught at max, 2 at a time. That can be enough, but there's another school, and that's called Ma'aseh Bereshit, the subject of creation, the mysteries of the universe. According to Maimonides, these are the laws of what we call physics and what we call metaphysics, for lack of a better word. The mysteries of creation, at one point, they're very similar to what we teach in the Sefer Yetzirah, but only to a point. What we learn in the mysteries of creation is how to experience and understand the underlying fundamental fabrics of the energies, which are the structures of our space-time continuum, our known universe. And I might add, that realm and domain called heaven, which is the parallel universe from which our universe came forth. The two of them are a symbiotic relationship. And as such, one can learn the secrets of the nature. And those who become masters of such secrets can learn to manipulate the forces of nature. This type of experience does require internal introversion and personal experience. This is not an academic course. It's not dealing with external applications which are experienced through the conscious mind, like the occult. In order to tap into these forces, one must experience what the Sefer Yetzirah later called the 10 Sefirot Belima. And I speak of the 10 Sefirot in the Gateway to the Kabbalah series, which is online. Of course, in the Sefer Yetzirah series, which is online. I'm teaching them in the Ohel Moed series, which is online. And the Sefirot, I emphasize, are not only phases and modes of consciousness. They are actual energy forces of the laws of nature, which underlie all fabric of creation. We experience them as modes of consciousness and experience them as modes of energy going through our minds, but they exist independently outside the mind. How then can an individual experience these things other than through the mind? And therefore the teaching of these things can only be one-on-one, with a master guiding the student into the subtle nuances of these things to experience them directly. But as one learns these things, one becomes aware of a greater universe. And the one who wishes to experience the greatness of the universe, to actually touch out and ascend beyond the limitations of the space-time continuum in which we live, to go into the inner recesses of consciousness, and if you will, descend into the depths of the human soul to our source, going deeper and deeper, layer and layer, from parallel universe to parallel universe, to ultimately touch the throne of God, which we call the levels of heaven. These are the secrets of the chariot of Ezekiel. This requires of one a higher level. Not only can this only be, being that it's intuitive and psychic and it's internal, can only be taught one-on-one. This requires inner travel. And as such, that cannot be taught to somebody. One must be able to experience it themselves. And the guide can only give, if you will, pointers along the way. It's actually referred to here, the literal verse that the Mishnah and others uses, that gives them the chapter headings. But ultimately, this last school leads to prophecy, connection. This is pretty much what I teach on KosherTorah, of all the classes that we do, in meditation, that is. These are the things, and these are the laws. But then it says, be careful. Because the one who makes serious inquiries into four things are better that he didn't come into this world. Why? Because you can expand human consciousness to the point where you can no longer contain the revelations in a physical body. As we proceed through this material, we will get to the famous story of the four sages who ascended into what's called the Pardus, the secret heavens above, one of whom gazed and died. He took in too much he couldn't handle. He literally burnt a fuse. Better that you don't contemplate. It says here what's above and what's below, right? What's before and what's after. Now, it speaks here of creation. What is before creation? Well, we are not necessarily referring to the paths of the Merkava or the Bereshit, which we just said. Before creation is not an essence or time of which it's speaking. It's speaking of a level beyond what consciousness can grasp. Like God said to Moses, no man can see my face and live, but I will show you my backside. Even though later it said metaphorically that God spoke to Moses face to face, it wasn't the same. The face is a symbolic face. Moses was able to see all of the universe, as we're going to learn. But what's before it? What's after it? Why are the things the way that they are? That is something the human soul cannot even comprehend. What is above? Why things the way they are? What is below? What is above good? What is below evil? Alright? What is before? What is after? All of these are symbolic references to forces and domains beyond the limitations of the human mind. And still, whoever has no consideration of the honor of his master would be better off if he had not come to the world. Though we are not, or I should let me rephrase, though we are warned not to go into domains which we cannot experience, we are obligated to learn those things which we can. Indeed, it is considered obligatory in the study of Torah that one literally study all aspects of Torah until they can get to the level of what we call Merkava, which I must emphasize emphatically is not an academic course of learning. It's not just reading the words of Ezekiel chapter 1 and finding some philosophical commentary on it. No. It is a comprehensive, psychic, intuitive experience, the likes of which most of these philosophical Kabbalists of today have no idea. With that introduction into this material, let's now go into the Gemara. The Gemara, in its traditional way, goes into dialectic, philosophical type discussions, but at the same time conceals within its words many things which we are now going to open up. So the Gemara asks, first you say a person should not study the account of the divine chariot by himself. Now obviously, he's a person who is able to understand it. And then you say, unless he's a sage, he can understand it by himself. So, why this dichotomy? Again, the Gemara says, this is the meaning. Forbidden sexual relations may not be expounded by a teacher to 3 students. Why? I already gave you the answer for that. Nor may a teacher expound the subject of creation to 2 students. Why? I already gave you the answer to that. Nor may a teacher teach the account of the divine chariot to 1 student, unless the student is one who understands and does not have to ask questions. Do you get that now? When you're having a psychic intuitive moment, you have to get it. I'm going to give you an example of exactly what I'm talking about. Many years ago, in my younger days when I was studying in Jerusalem, I was at the side of a rabbi. And in the tradition of the Ariel, they wear 2 sets of tefillin for the morning prayers. The traditional tefillin called the Rashi, and the lesser traditional tefillin called Rabbeinu Tam. They're 2 little boxes. They make them very small so they'll fit onto the arm and onto the head. But now there's something curious. The order of how they're put on. On the head, the Rashi tefillin is lower, and the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin is higher. But on the arm, the Rashi tefillin is higher, and the Rabbeinu Tam is lower. The opposite. And I remember, I asked the rabbi, why is this so? He looked at me, shrugged his shoulders, raised his hands, like as if to say, I don't know, with a smile. And the minute he did that, I smiled and I said, I understand, thank you. How many of you got it? How many of you understood his answer? As I said, let me repeat. He raised his hands up as if shrugging his shoulders, as if to say, I don't know, with a smile, and I understood. Let me explain. When you raise your hands in prayer, right? Remember, you're raising your elbows up. You're raising your hands up when you're in the meditative position. For those of you who study this material, what happens to your arms? Your arms go up. What happens when your arms go up? Your elbow is lifted up. And guess what happens then? The lower tefillin, the Rabbeinu Tam, gets lifted up higher than the Rashi. And then the order is exactly as it is on the head. In other words, when you're in the proper position of prayer, everything is in a proper state of alignment. Did you get it? He didn't say a word, but I got it. I understood from his body movement. This is what it means that you have to understand without asking questions. I endeavor to teach this in everything that I write. I try to write poetically. I try to give you subtle hints. For those of you who join my live classes, you know, before we go online, I play to you songs. I don't play these songs haphazardly. I play them with very specific intent, that either in the lyrics or in the tune, I am sending subtle messages. And, for the most part, you don't get it. You don't connect. It goes right over your heads. Some of you, very few, get it. Some of you, very few, can be taught Maaseh Merkava one-on-one. I do the best with what I can to teach what I am allowed publicly. But I can only teach certain things one-on-one with those who are able to learn by themselves. I have to be able to talk to you metaphorically, symbolically, in a parable. Jack, pay attention. Because then, through that intuitive message, you're supposed to get the secrets of the Torah. And if you do, then you understand. And if you don't, what can I say? The Gemara now continues. A teacher may not expound the subject of creation to 2 students. So the Gemara asks, where in Scripture is this derived? Where do we learn this? The Gemara says, the rabbis taught. It says, and it quotes here Deuteronomy 4, verse 32, for inquire now regarding the early days. And the Hebrew term for inquire is she'al. And it says here that the word inquire is in the singular. Therefore, we infer that one person may inquire, but not 2. When it says inquire now regarding the ancient days, or the early days. The early days is the period of the ancient times. There's one school of ancient teaching that I proliferate, that even the Ariel and the Ramak, the great theoretical Kabbalists themselves, denied. And needless to say, we don't listen to them in this respect. And that was the teachings of the pre-Adamic civilizations. The things that happened before there was the present situation. You see, according to Jewish teachings, there was human civilization on the earth long before Adam. Adam was the first of the Adamic race, but there were other races before him. When modern science looks, for example, at cave drawings in the Sahara Desert and finds pictures of forests and grasslands and cattle and water, and looks around and sees nothing but a dead desert, gee, what the heck happened? Something happened. When you go and you look at the ruins of ancient cities, and you find ancient teachings about pre-Adamic wars and destructions, and then you hear echoes in the Midrash, how it says God created and destroyed worlds before Adam. And you find echoes of this right in Scripture, where it says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and verse 2 says, the earth was void and chaos, Tohu and Bohu. And then you read in Isaiah, where it says clearly God did not create the world in Tohu. Well, if He didn't create it in Tohu, how did it get that way between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2? Something is missing. This is recognized by biblical scholars, not only Jewish. Some Christian scholars even recognize something's missing. These are the secrets of the ancient past. Alright? One-on-one can we teach them. The Gemara continues. You might think that one person may inquire about what happened before creation. Now, creation here is talking about the creation of the universe, not the creation of Adam. Therefore it says, for inquire, again in the singular, from the day that God created man on earth. From then on you may inquire only about what happened after creation. Which man? The original man. The secrets of the pre-Adamic civilizations are very, very little known. There are very few sources for it. Even though everybody else, long list, you go online to my my essays online about the secrets of the sabbatical cycles. And I quote there like 20, 30 sources. You find that the Zohar references it. Great famous writers like Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Code of Jewish Law, held this view. Even the Ariel, who rejected it, his own Kabbalistic teacher, the Radbaz, held by this. And later authorities too. Down through the ages. It's an ancient teaching, but is very rarely known, and rightly so. You might think that it's also forbidden to inquire about what happened during the 6 days of creation, because man was created on the 6th day. Therefore it says, again, regarding the early days that preceded you, meaning that the first day of creation and onward, you are permitted to inquire. And the days of creation we know were epochs of time which happened over, by modern measure of time, billions of years. You see, here's the interesting thing. As Einstein has proven, the measurement of time is relative. So absolutely, 6 days of 24 hours was all that was needed to create the universe. And in that time, 13 to 15 billion years passed within those 6 days. So whose 6 days, how do we measure a day? When the Psalms says that the day of Hashem is 1,000 years. Okay, well how long is a day? Okay, well it's 24 hours, exactly like we measure. But how fast does time move? Well, how slow does time move? It's a relative thing. It's a secret that not everybody can handle. So, you might think that a person may also inquire about what is above and what is below, what happened before, what will happen after. Therefore it says, from one end of the heaven to the other end of the heaven, which means regarding the things that are found from one end of the heaven to the other end, you may inquire. Meaning within the context of the space-time continuums in which we experience and know as heavens and the earth. we can eventually embrace within the context of the human knowledge. In the Lurianic system, we will call those the worlds of Yetzirah and Asiyah. They are within our grasp. But the worlds which we call Beriah and Atzilut, they're beyond what human consciousness can experience, and therefore said, don't try to go there with your intellect. Alright? You cannot get there. Alright? That's why you don't ask what. The symbolic little code. Moving right along. Gemara continues on page 12a. But now that we derive from the passage from one end of the heavens to the other, meaning that we may not inquire into things that are outside the realm of creation, why then do we need the phrase, from the day that God created man on the earth? Doesn't it tell us like the same thing? So the Gemara says, we need this verse to substantiate the statement made by Rabbi Eliezer, who said, pay attention. Adam's height reached from the earth all the way to the heavens, as it says, from the day that God created man on earth, from one end of heaven. What does that mean? Well, let's continue. It says, but when he sinned, the Holy One, blessed be, put his hand on him and made him shorter, as it says, back and front you have restricted me, you've laid your hand upon me. What does it mean that Adam's height was from the heavens to the earth? Is it possible that the original stature of Adamic man was, 100 miles high, went in outer space? It kind of be hard to breathe if it was that big. No. What it means, obviously, is that the human mind was able to simultaneously incorporate and access all knowledge and information in the universes at a single moment. Think about this. You and I have a hard time paying attention to one thing at one time. When we try to multitask to do 2 or 3 things at one time, many of us get confused. How about having complete cosmic consciousness? All information in the world, and existence in this space-time continuums in which we exist, conscious and the unconscious world, all made conscious, all made aware, all made remembered, all made conscious, everything, all at once. Can you imagine how your brain would be so full it would explode? You wouldn't just have to think of one thing at a time. You'd have to think of an infinite number of things at a time. We can't handle that. Proof? How about this? Right now, if I want to, I know how, I don't know, to move my hands, to rub my nose if I have an itch, to scratch my head, to move my lips and my voice and my mouth to speak. Right? Right. What part of my conscious mind right now, or yours for that matter, is involved in the control of the metabolism of my body? What part of my conscious mind right now is actively involved in the digestion of my dinner? What part of my conscious mind is actively involved in the cellular regeneration going on throughout my physiology? What part of my conscious mind is actively involved with the electronic discharges going into the synapses of my brain, sending signals up and down my central nervous system, enabling me to sense, feel, talk, see, hear, and the like? My conscious mind isn't aware of any of that, and neither is yours. All of that is happening, if you will, on autopilot in the domains called the unconscious mind. There are those who know how to delve into consciousness and can tap into those areas of themselves and thereby control their physiology. It's a dangerous thing. Why? Think about if you got into a point where you became consciously aware of the beating of your heart and then you consciously took control of the beating of your heart so that you can slow down your metabolism. Question: what would happen if for a moment you were distracted? Or for a moment you forgot to pay attention? Well, if I'm holding something, I accidentally forget it for a moment, I can drop it and it breaks. If you are in conscious control of the beating of your heart, and for a moment you don't focus conscious on it, guess what? Your heart stops beating, and then guess what? You die. That's why it's left in autonomous, unconscious hands. And it's dangerous to go into areas and domains in which things are happening unconsciously, and to control it consciously, for fear that you can mess up the entire system of how the body is meant to operate. It is a well-known and documented fact that there are groups of meditators in the East, the Orient, who literally can take, sitting up on like Mount Everest or something like that, up in like the Himalayas. They can clothe themselves with cold, sopping wet blankets, and in the freezing cold sit there and in meditation, elevate their physical body heat tens of degrees, and completely dry out the blankets, and you can actually see the steam. This is not urban legend. They have had scientific teams that have gone up and filmed them doing this, have actually watched, have it recorded. This is the ability of what we call mind over matter. This is only one small example. When we go into meditative trances, in what we call the Merkava, you can literally, as it states here, see from one end of the world to another. And yet, when we symbolically refer to as eat of the tree of knowledge, good and evil, somehow, some way, we lost contact with that higher ability of ourselves, and we disconnected from that part of ourselves which enables us that aspect of consciousness. And that disconnection created what today we call in psychology the unconscious. So ultimately, we never really fell from that stature, but a part of us got disconnected from it. Think about it in this metaphor. Let's say, for example, you accidentally get your toe stuck in a hole somewhere in the dark. And let's make believe that your toe becomes conscious all of itself, and does not realize that it's part of your foot, and that your foot is part of the rest of you. But the toe thinks of itself as a complete, independent, disconnected entity. I am Mr. Toe. And you look around in that dark hole, and that's your world. You don't realize that you're connected to something higher, and there's a greater world around you. It's a good analogy of how to understand what we call the fallen part of our soul in this physical body. Because ultimately we are still connected with our higher self, which exists in this higher state. It is there at this very moment. And the only reason why we are not aware is because we block ourselves off from experience. And therefore the entire meditative path of the Merkava is to reconnect to the whole. And that's why it requires the psychic intuitive ability of one to be able to, if you will, find their way. This is the process of what we call in Hebrew tikkun, or rectification. And as you can imagine, it is not an easy process. Again, our section here continues. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav that Adam, the first man, stretched from one side of the world to the other side of the world. Now it says here, when lying down, he extended from east to west. But what does that mean? Well, it says here, for it says, from the day that God created man on the earth, and from one end of the heavens to the other end. Deuteronomy 5:32. Again, it says, when he sinned, holy and blessed be, he placed his hand on him and made him shorter in consciousness, as it says, you've laid your hand on me. Now the Gemara says, really? It appears to be a contradiction between these verses. One says that he reached from the heavens to the earth, the other that he extended from east to west. Which is it? Gemara says, no contradiction. They both have the same dimension. The distance from east to west is the same from heavens to the earth. Think about that. What does that mean? When you go into the original Merkava traditions, the oldest of old Qumranic literature from the Second Temple period, the vast majority of which is censored and unknown to this very day, they spoke of people making these psychic ascents. And they spoke how from one level to another was a distance of such and such a distance. Some referred to the distance being 500 parsecs. And they said that also God's body had this symbolic measurement from one level to the next. They would measure distances in years. They would say the distance from heaven to the earth is 500 years. Does that make any sense? Isn't distance in time required to be understood by the concept of velocity? How far am I going, or how fast I'm going? Otherwise, how could you measure it? If I was to say the distance between New York and California is 500 years, well, being that we can measure that the distance in miles, for example, is 3,000, and if it takes us 500 years to go 3,000 miles, then I can estimate how fast I'm going. But if all I know is that the distance from point A to B is 500 years and I don't know the exact distance, how then does time translate to space to give me velocity? You see, when you think in that way, you miss the point. East and west, we've studied in our Sefer Yetzirah series. Heaven and earth, we've studied in our Sefer Yetzirah series. We're not talking about the earth and the sky. We're talking about one dimension to the next. That Adam existed simultaneously in these parallel dimensions, and still does. I reveal to you a secret of these schools. As I just mentioned to you moments ago, that higher part of ourselves which exists simultaneously in these other dimensions and is our higher self is still there. It's always been there. And only the smallest part of us actually fell in what's called the eating of the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge, good and evil. Now, here's the secret. You see, our higher selves, which remain in heaven, known as our Magids, are known as a collective. They are a hive mind of beings, an entire race of hyperdimensional entities. We call them our Magids, we call them our guardian angels. Together they are known collectively by the name Metatron. And we are very familiar with the ancient legend in the book of Genesis that states that Enoch walked with God for 365 years. No coincidence that is the number of the days of the solar cycle. And then he was not, for God had taken him. He ascended to heaven to become Metatron. But there's an ancient tradition that Metatron was with God in the beginning at the time of creation. And then the Tosafot, commentary on the Talmud, which comments on this section in the Gemara, Tractate Yevamot, which asks, well, if Metatron is with God, what exactly that means we'll discuss in a second. How could Enoch have been there at that time? And they answer, well, obviously, there was a pre-existing Metatron, and Enoch became part of that which already was. Now, who is this Metatron? Who is called the angel of the Lord, who is called the little Yud-Keh Vav-Keh, He is called the guardian of the Torah. He is called the angel of the Torah. He is therefore called the Torah. He is therefore the Word of God that was with God in the beginning, the Torah, in which it states that God gazed into the Torah and created the universe. He's not an angel. They're the souls of Israel, God's people, Adam, the human race, the spark and source of our souls, connected as they are to the divine. And we have labeled them with layer and layer and layer of metaphor to confuse and cloud issues, to make distinctions and divisions with all kinds of philosophies and creeds and credos and the like, which totally tear apart the truth of things. Validating and vindicating what the Talmud says here. You can't teach this stuff publicly unless people can somehow know it, see it, experience it for themselves. I can talk about it until I'm blue in the face. Apparently I do, because as much as I talk about it, people never seem to get the message. So, a question is asked here in Test. Did the question of the distance of heaven and earth come up previously with Alexander? Well, again, the question is a symbolic question, referencing what is the place and way. Actually, with Alexander was something a little different, and we can go into the previous lessons we've done in this series about Alexander and his supposed journeys to inner earth. But as you can see, we are dealing here with things which go beyond the pale of where human contemplation is comfortable. And that's why we say that the ascent to the throne of God is a descent into human consciousness. And for those who have ever taken any of my meditation or magic courses know, this is a path which can only be taught one-on-one. For those of you who I have the opportunity to interact with on any regular basis know that I tell you things privately that I will never repeat publicly. And I will tell certain things to certain people that I won't tell to others. Why? Because I intuit, I feel, I sense that there is certain knowledge that I can give to someone, and maybe not to another. I will share what I can share, simply because this material which I do share is available within textual literature. You can find it out there. So therefore, if it's out there, I can put it all together and put it on a plate for you to partake. But knowing about a thing and then knowing it itself are as different as day and night. And indeed, now the Gemara is going to continue with even greater details about the secrets of creation. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rab, 10 things were created on the first day, and they are heaven and earth, Tohu and Bohu, that was the chaos and the desolation, spoken of in Genesis 1-2. Light and darkness, wind and water, the 24 hours of the day and night. And he's going to give now verses to validate each. Heaven and earth, because it says in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Tohu and Bohu, because it says in the earth was Tohu and Bohu, meaning void and dark, or desolate. Light and darkness, because darkness, as it says, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. Light, because God said, let there be light. Wind and water, for it says, and the wind of God, or the Spirit of God, hovered over the surface of the waters. 24-hour days of day and night, because it says there was evening and there was morning one day. Now, before we go on, let's dabble into some of this here. Number one, we're all familiar, I pray, with the opening verses of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? And we said that the earth was void, Tohu and Bohu. And then the Spirit of God, as it said, hovered over the waters. God said, let there be light, and there was light. He separated from light from the darkness. Okay, we all know that. Day one. Question. Where did the waters come from? Where did it say, let there be waters? Where does it say, let there be wind? The Spirit of God, the Ruach. Where did the Ruach come from? Let there be Ruach. Where does it say, all right, that any of the darkness, where did the darkness come from? Where did the Spirit come from? Where did the waters come from? Where did the Tohu come from? Where did the Bohu come from? They're just there. We say that the universe was created something out of nothing. All right, well, I would think God, He's so perfect and everything else. Can't He just snap the divine fingers and all the universe is set? What's all of this building stuff, this evolution from stage 1 to stage 2? Right? Why does He need 6 days? Was it kind of hard for Him to create it all in one day? Obviously, we're dealing here with symbolisms. Now, you ask some people who don't like symbolisms, they say, well, it's a mystery. That's what it says. That's not really, I don't know why. Mine is not the question why. Mine's what to do and die. Say, Kyle. Well, that's not the way we go around learning Torah. That's not the way we go around learning Scripture. There are teachings here passed down for thousands of years of how these things are understood, and that's how we understand them. That's what we're dealing with here. So ultimately, we obviously had to have had these things created. If they're already existing at the time of day one, then they must have been created on day one at some time. When is day one? Oh, I don't know. So, being that day one is symbolically 24 hours, and all of these things are created on day one, some of them, therefore, symbolically speaking, had to be created at 1 o'clock, and then at 2 o'clock, and then at 3 o'clock, and then 4, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock more. Which was created when? Scripture does not say. All we know that obviously they must have come from somewhere at some time, in that we're talking about existence in a space and time continuum. So that is how we have to understand this. Everything has its time and everything its place. We have learned in a Baraita, what is this Tohu? What is this void that we're talking about? It says that Tohu, he translates it here as the green ray that circles the entire world, and from it darkness comes forth. Because it says, He made darkness His concealment around Him, Psalm 18:12. It is what's known as the Kav Yarok. In ancient times, the Yarok wasn't considered green, it was considered blue. If you ever look at the earth from outside, you'll see there's a ribbon of blue which circles the planet. That's the life force energy. Maybe it's the electromagnetic force. Maybe it's the nefesh, soul force, the life force energy of the earth. Even Maimonides, the rationalist, clearly states that the planet is alive, that the planet has a soul, and that the planet is conscious of itself and of God. And as such, the planet is a living, conscious, sentient being, just like we are. And just like we have an aura, alright, which is around our bodies, so too does the earth. In Hebrew we call the aura the ur makif, the surrounding light. Well, that's not just a symbolic metaphor. It's an actual energy field. That was the Tohu. And it says, V'ha'aretz haita Tohu, that the land is not just the physical earth, it's all of physical structure. Haita Tohu, it had a life force presence to it. And if it wasn't for the life force presence, nothing could come forth into structure and form. Bohu, he says these are the damp stones that are sunk into the depths of the earth, from which the water gushes forth. As it says, he shall measure it with the line of chaos and with the weights of emptiness. Isaiah 34:11. What on earth does that mean? Well, the Tohu is the energy. We refer to this in the Ohel Moed class as the Tzura, the energy within. And the Bohu is the Homer. It is the structure that the energy goes into, like body and soul, like light and vessel. And from the two of them together, structured form will come. So Tohu and Bohu are the fundamental primordial energy and vessel, force and form, Tzura v'Homer, from which forth will come all things. If you ever read in the commentary of Nachmanides, Ramban, he speaks that in the beginning, the first thing that God created was what we call the prima-matter. It was something called the hiyuli. It was the fundamental energy from which came forth everything else. And I talk about this in the Gateway to Kabbalah series, the Ohel Moed series, and we just mentioned it here. This is what gave rise to the Tohu and the Bohu. And what about the Spirit of God, the Ruach Elohim? What about the waters? Apparently, that's something else. And that is pretty much all that we have time for in this class now. So with God's help, we're going to pick up and continue through these teachings in the tractate Hagigah. And God be willing, I'll see you in our next class, and we'll pick up where we left off. Thank you for joining me all tonight. See you all next time. God bless. Shalom. Next time, 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 God bless. Shalom.